Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the National Environmental Health Association, welcome. Welcoming you to our edition of Advocacy Insights for January 16th, 2025. And I'm going to introduce you here to Doug Farquhar, who is our Director of Government Affairs. Doug, the webinar is yours.
Michelle, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Obviously, as everybody knows, this has been an incredibly busy week, month transition that's been going on over the past few weeks here. We are very busy in Washington. We're very busy in the States. So let's get right down to it. Next slide, Michelle. The 119th Congress convened on January 3rd. Congress goes into session a couple of weeks before the presidential inauguration. So Congress has been in work for a few weeks. One of the things that the 118th left on the table was the budget. They did not get the fiscal year 2025 budget passed. Another thing that they left on the table is debt ceiling. This is something that Donald Trump, the incoming president, did not want to have to deal with. But in turn, because they did not adopt an extension of the debt ceiling, that is something that's going to come up in July of 2025. And that's something we'll talk about going forward. And another thing I want to bring forward is the 118th Congress, out of over 10,000 bills that were introduced, 275 were ultimately passed. Mostly, they passed bills to rename post offices, to deal with Veterans Affairs, to talk about duck stamps. Substantially, they did nothing. The 119th Congress, if we look at it, Donald Trump did win. He got 1% more votes than he did in 2020. In the Senate, the Republicans took the Senate, and that was something that was expected. They have right now a 51-47 seat advantage, and that's because Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance are expected to resign their seats as of Monday. Marco Rubio is expected to be Secretary of State. J.D. Vance was elected vice president. So that means they only, at this point, or starting Monday, they're only going to have a 51-47 advantage. The good thing for the Republicans is that the governors in those states can appoint replacements. Both those governors are Republicans, so there shouldn't be any controversy there where a Democrat's going to get appointed. That's what's going on right now in the Senate. But as you can see, 51-47 is far from the 60 votes that they need to avoid a filibuster. Senate President Thune has said we are going to keep the filibuster, meaning anything that gets passed in the Senate is going to require 60 votes or be done via reconciliation. In the House, they originally, the Republicans ended up with a 5-seat majority as of November. Since then, Matt Gaetz resigned his seats. That gave him a 219 to 215 majority. The president-elect has chosen 2 people. Congressman Walz out of Florida, Congresswoman Stefanik out of New York, to join his administration. Because of that, that means 3 seats are open right now, or is going to be open as of Monday. That means that the Republicans as of Monday are going to have a 216 to 215 advantage, which means 1 Republican member can kill anything. Anything that they don't like, they can kill. What the other thing is, unlike with the Senate, where governors can appoint people, in the House, you have to elect them, which means you have to put an election on. Those elections will not occur until April. Now, even though both the seats are very safe Republican seats, that means that Speaker Johnson is going to be working with a 1-seat advantage between now and April. And it also means if anything happens, anybody else, any other Republican resigns, gets sick, steps down, goes to jail, any of those things means that the House will be tied, and the trying to get the Trump agenda through is going to be tougher to impossible. So we're at a very, very tight House and a very, very tight Senate. Democrats, they won seats in Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Nevada. These are all states that Trump won, which means that instead of having a real strong majority going in, Democrats really did incredibly well during the last election. And what it also means that if you have anything you have to get done, pass the budget, do the debt ceiling, anything regarding the Trump agenda, if any of the House Republicans say no, they're going to have to find a Democrat to offset that. That may be extremely difficult to do in moving forward. Next slide, please. The budget, our favorite issue, because right now the fiscal year 2025 budget has not been passed. It began in October. We are already 5 months into the fiscal year 2025, or 4 months into the 25 budget fiscal year. We don't have a budget yet. We're running on the same numbers we did in fiscal year 2024. What Congress did, of course, in December, is they passed a continuing resolution. That meant that the government stays open using fiscal year 2024 numbers until March 14th. When March 14th comes around, here are the options. We're either going to have to pass the budget with all Republican votes and perhaps no Democratic votes, pass the budget with Republican votes, and if any Republicans step away, Democratic votes to offset those Republican votes, or they're going to have to pass another continuing resolution. Right now, it only takes 9 members to throw out the current speaker. Under McCarthy, the last speaker, it only was 1 member that could do that, and that's the reason he could never get anything done. They've upped that to 9 members. That's good. But the Tea Party caucus is over 9 members. The moderate caucus, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, they're more than 9 members. The people, the congressmen who were trying to not vote, originally chose not to vote for Speaker Johnson, that's more than 9 members. He's got an incredibly tough situation. He doesn't have any room to, any wiggle room to mess with this stuff. Now, mind you, when Trump won in 2016, he had a 49-member advantage in the House when he came in. Still had trouble getting stuff done. Now he has a 1-member advantage and a very weak speaker to try to get things through. Senate's a different story. He's got a few seats there. It's looks like it's a little bit more solid and more coordinated. House, it's not there. So we're going to have to get things passed by March 14th. Now, at this point, neither the House nor the Senate have agreed on top-line numbers. Republicans and Democrats have not agreed on top-line numbers. This means we don't know how much money we have out there to spend. If they do not pass a continuing resolution or a budget, stopgap measures begin in April. That means a 1% across the board budget for not only non-defense programs, but for defense programs as well. And so when you start cutting back on all those defense programs, Republican members are going to be upset. When you start cutting back on those non-defense programs, both Republican and Democratic members are going to be upset. So it's going to be a really tough situation. Reconciliation. Let me talk about that in a moment. Debt limit. This will hamper the Trump agenda severely, because to get it through, they need to have all the Republican votes, and there are already Republicans who will absolutely say, we're not going to vote for any debt increase, or he's going to have to get Democrats to offset. Democrats aren't likely to be very willing to work with the Trump agenda, Trump administration at all, or the Republicans at all, unless they get something in return. One thing could be wildfire relief. Obviously, LA and the California delegation wants funding to cover for natural disasters. However, if and one way they can do that is saying, okay, if you want those votes, we're going to put the debt ceiling in that. Might be a possibility they do that. If they don't, then they're going to have to figure out another way to get enough votes to pass the debt ceiling. You do not pass the debt ceiling, then we're going to have a situation where the US government defaults. That means our interest rates are going to increase. Interest rates are not something we can negotiate. We absolutely have to pay that, no doubt. And if we don't, so that means that there's going to be even less money to pay for other activities in the budget. And it means they're going to have to go after things that Donald Trump has said we absolutely will not touch. Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, defense, non-defense, everything's going to be on the table. So it's going to be a very difficult road for Speaker Johnson to get the debt ceiling raised. Now, as I said, it also has to be done in the Senate. That's not a big of an issue. In the House, it's a huge issue. Right now, Treasury is scrambling and doing everything they can to try to find money to keep the government afloat. Without that debt ceiling increase, it'll come to a close. The other thing, Trump tax cuts. They're going to expire in December 2025. Now, if you're in the business sector, don't worry. The ones that were passed in 2016 were permanent. If you're an individual and you have to do your own personal taxes, they will go up significantly in December unless they pass something. This is something the Republicans do not want to do. Number one thing on their agenda is to make sure that they do not raise taxes in December. This is something that means that the tax cuts will likely go into reconciliation. Reconciliation package is what you've heard many people talk about, and there are reasons for that. It's because they do not have to have a filibuster-proof majority. Only need a simple majority to get it passed in the Senate. If you get all the House Republicans to agree to it and a majority of the Senate Republicans, it's going to pass. You got reconciliation. But there are a lot of limitations to reconciliation. Finally, I'm going to talk about the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, Elon Musk and Vivek's program. That is something that is not an actual department, doesn't have any legal authority, and it isn't able to do anything. It can only make recommendations. Their recommendations aren't due until July of 2026, and they don't have a lot of wiggle room politically to work with. They may come in and say, we want to do things, but many of those things where you can cut are going to be things in defense. It's going to be things that are very near and dear to the citizens, like Social Security, things like the Farm Bill, agriculture, things like FEMA, how much money goes out for FEMA, many things that are transportation, dollars to pay for roads and bridges. These are things that are very popular. It's going to be very tough for them to cut. Next slide. President Trump's agenda. Number one thing he wants to do, continue that tax policy. That is a budget issue, so it can go into reconciliation. To be honest with you, the president really only has 100 days to get this done. After 100 days, the president's agenda gets put on the back burner. Other issues come up. Things just generally do not get enacted unless you get it done in the first 100 days. That's when President Obama got everything passed. That's when President Biden got everything passed. That's when majority of presidents get everything passed, with the exception of Trump. During 2016, when he was elected, the only thing he was able to get passed was tax cuts. All the other big issues, border wall, having Mexico pay for it, sending people home, bringing manufacturing jobs back to the US, increasing tariffs, all the things he talked about, none of them got done. And it's because he couldn't get them done in that first 100 days. That's when he had a better majorities in the House. Right now, with the 1 seat majority, it's going to be really, really tough. But he's going to be able, that's the reason they're trying to push so hard to get everything put into reconciliation. So it will not have those objections. Hopefully they can get everything passed in their minds. Foreign policy. Right now, foreign policy is Ukraine, possibly Gaza, and tariffs. If they there's a really good incentive for him to bring in tariffs, because if he wants to have tax cuts, he's going to have to find offsets. Tariffs could provide those offsets, meaning you increase taxes over here, it's going to give him the ability to decrease taxes over here. Right now, what his tariff policy could bring in up to several $1 trillion if it all went according to plan. That's not going to happen, but it's going to be something that could easily offset any sort of tax cuts. Border security, immigration. He talked quite a bit about that, but if you want to do border security, if you want to round people up and send them back home, even if they've broken the law, illegal or legal, it's going to take a lot of money. They don't have the money right now. They're going to have to figure out some way to offset it. Tariffs may be a way for them to offset it. Another issue to bring up, if you do tariffs, if you do send all the low income workers back to their home countries, it's going to lead to inflation. One of his main objectives here is to tackle inflation. When you do immigration policy like he's talking about, when you send all those cheap labor home, you need to find somebody else to do that labor. That's going to come at a higher cost. Farm labor, that's going to come at a much higher cost than we're seeing right now. So that would mean that it's very likely that all produce grown in the US is going to go up significantly. All soybean, grains, everything else that is produced by even meats from slaughterhouses, everything that we use immigrant labor for, that's going to go up significantly. That's going to make it very difficult for him to tackle inflation if he does implement his sending people back to the countries and doing immigration reform. Finally, reconciliation. Reconciliation package can only deal with budgets. They can only deal with revenue, spending, and the federal deficit. So yes, they could put the debt limit in there, the debt ceiling in there, and they can tackle it that way. That's not a problem. They can put tax cuts in there, and that shouldn't be a problem. But if you want to start dealing with border security, immigration, anything outside of spending, then technically it's illegal. And it's up to the congressional budget, well, the congressional parliamentarian to determine if that's going to be allowed to go in. When they passed Obamacare under reconciliation, they did it because they called it a tax program. By doing it, the parliamentarian let it through. Addressing these budgetary issues, the parliamentarian will let it through. But if anything else goes in there, like sending people home, any sort of major changes to immigration policy, any major changes to anything outside the budget, parliamentarian, all they have to do is say no. And that's a likely occurrence to happen, which means it's going to be a lot for the Trump package to go through, one. And two, even if the parliamentarian lets it go through, very tight, it may not make it through the House, it may not make it through the Senate. Next slide, please. Confirmations are moving along. Doesn't look like he'll have too much trouble getting his people in place. The difference with this round of nomination versus previous administrations is the only unifying factor to all these folks is they're loyal to Trump. That's been his foremost issue. Are they loyal to me? Will they kowtow to me? They will, that's great. But then you have inherent contradictions. Robert Kennedy wants to change the entire nutritional program of this country. That's going to mean one of the things he really wants to do and is already in place is federal labeling. That's going in place. We are going to have package of labeling on sugars, on sodium, and on fat content. Going forward, he's going to make sure it gets over the line. That's going to be one issue that he's not going to, that he won't pull back on. Question is, well, will the USDA secretary support it? Will there be a battle within his cabinet between Robert Kennedy and Brooke Rollins? Are they going to be supportive of this? How do we deal with other inherent contradictions from the people going forward? Linda McMahon on education, she's a WWF owner personality. She doesn't have any background in education. We don't know which direction she's going to go. Defense, how are we going to reform the military? How are we going to actually make changes there? He doesn't have a lot of background in that, in working with Congress. It's going to be very difficult. Are they going to focus on that? Or are they going to focus on immigration? Are they going to focus on homeland security? Or are they going to deal with pesticide reform like Robert Kennedy wants to do? There's not a uniformity within this group of people. There's not a uniformity of command. Nobody knows which direction the president's going to go. He's notorious for being in favor of something before he's against it. He was against electric vehicles before Elon Musk joined his program, and then he's in favor of it. Goes back and forth all the time, makes it incredibly difficult to figure out which direction he's going to go. That's the problem that his former chief of staffs had. Next slide, please. Big five federal agencies. Reason I want to bring this in is they always talk, we're going to cut the federal spending. You can't cut net interest. You can't cut mandatory programs. That's 66%. The final 26%, you can cut. Half of that is defense. That means only about 16% is going to be defense discretionary that you can cut. Of that, farm bill, farm commodities, natural disasters, roads, bridges. They were talking about a program today that's going to cost between 80 billion and 100 billion. In that wiggle room, between 80 and 100, you can fund the entire CDC and the entire EPA at Biden levels. So you don't have that. So, the amount of wiggle room they have to cut the budget, very, very narrow. Next slide, please. Final slide. These are our priorities for NEHA. We're going to do our best to protect the CDC National Center for Environmental Health. We're going to ensure funding for FDA's Human Foods Program. We're going to focus to make sure environmental health is included in the Public Health Loan Forgiveness Program. We are going to support the environmental health workforce. We are going to support the state, local, tribal, and territorial environmental health workforce and agencies. We will build environmental health. Good news for environmental health. It's primarily funded by the state and local levels. Bad news for environmental health is that's not a priority for the new administration. Good news for environmental health, it is not a priority for the new administration. That's where we stand. Michelle, any questions?
Now we're taking a look to see if there's any questions. Brandy?
Yes, there were several questions. What are the biggest concerns for environmental health in the next few months? What bills should we be keeping an eye on?
The appropriation is really critical. Fiscal year 25 has not been enacted. FDA, we should be okay on the human foods program. There are other problems that Congress won't be dealing with that are problems there. But with the National Center for Environmental Health, they're being cut $150 million. That's like 2/3 of their budget. And at the way things are going right now, they could get cut to that point. So it could mean that many of the programs that we are used to seeing could be gone and eliminated. We are coming up with a program to really encourage our members to write Congress and send messages to try to protect these programs. Brandy?
So that's a great leadway to the next question that I have is, how can I support NEHA's efforts for environmental health?
We're moving forward with the program. It's not up yet, should be up within the next month or so, by the end of February at the latest, where you're going to be able to go online, be able to fill out some things and say, I want to send this letter or this message to my congressman. And it'll go directly to your congressman, to your senators, and it'll even go to your governor and your local policymakers if you want it to. But mostly what we're trying to do is get the word to our specific members. And the reason I'm saying that is because these would, if we send letters to our members who are from Texas, Alabama, all the middle part of the country, and they're on appropriations, that's going to be golden. If they hear that we need to support environmental health and it's important to their constituents, it's going to have a huge difference, a huge impact versus just sending a general letter from the NEHA, from all our members as part of the association.
So another question is, how many appointments are left?
Well, we got to get through the secretaries first. Once we get the secretaries, there's another 1,300 appointments. Now FDA, you only got a handful, really, and in FDA, you only have commissioner and the chief science officer. They have to get confirmed. Nobody else does. You get to USDA, you got a whole different ball of wax there, where you have not only the secretary, undersecretary, deputy undersecretaries. It goes down the same thing with HHS. You got all these positions they need to fill. When you get to CDC, you only got the CDC director to fill there. But that has to, before, in the previous years, it's only been recently that the CDC director has to go before the Senate. That position is going to have to go before the Senate now. We have a long way to go to get those positions in place. On top of the fact, we got to get the budget passed. On top of the fact, we have Trump's agenda to get passed. On top of the fact, we got a debt ceiling going forward.
Thanks, Doug. I think we're almost out of time for questions. But just a reminder, feel free to email Doug at his email address. That will be in the chat for anyone, any additional questions that were not addressed today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Look forward to seeing everybody next month. The third Thursday, 1 o'clock Mountain, 3 o'clock Eastern. Michelle.
And thank you all. Just a reminder that you'll be able to see this recording in community on the NEHA platform. And on behalf of the National Environmental Health Association, thank you all for being with us today. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.